If you're interested in meaning and how to navigate life as a human being in this crazy world we live in right now, then you're going to want to listen to this conversation that I had yesterday with Jim Palmer. We cover a lot of interesting topics. First, talking about Jim's journey from being a mega church pastor to being an expert on religious deconstruction and religious trauma. We talked about meaning and existential health and what are the core components of existential health. And then in part two, we went deeper into the idea if there is actually meaning, objective meaning in the world. And talked about a blog that he wrote called 10 Religious Ideas We No Longer Need to Believe. And in that conversation, we talk about the human problems that religious ideas try to solve, and then the fact that those problems don't go away when we shed religious baggage or walk away from the traditions we might have grown up in. So, welcome to the Sacred Everywhere, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. All right, well, welcome, Jim Palmer, to the Sacred Everywhere. So good to see you.
It's good to see you, Sherry. I'm really excited about kind of chatting with you today.
Yeah,
I've been a fan of yours for a long time. And of course, I think we met officially the first time at OrCon.
right.
Um, and so I've always been intrigued by a lot of the work that you're doing. And we obviously have a few mutual interests and things that we address. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
great being here.
Yeah, well, and same here. And for those who don't know, OrtCon is the Open and Relational Theology Conference, and I'm actually up. So I was there 2 years ago when you were there and met you then, and I'm going again this year. So I leave Monday for Wyoming.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I had been reading your posts and things. I guess mostly maybe on Facebook for quite a while before that. So it was great to meet you then, and so nice to have you join me here today.
Yeah, this is
Good stuff.
great. I've been on social media for a while,
Yeah,
and then I have kind of been doing most of my writing over on Substack currently, you
right.
know, um, but I appreciate it all. I mean, there's so many people that have an interest engaging in conversations about, meaning and, you know, religion and
Yeah,
spirituality and all that, like so um it's good to kind of have a spectrum of connections with people that kind of like approach it from a couple different places. So
right. Yeah, and we're in an interesting time right now regarding religion because so many of the kind of long-term religious structures are kind of falling apart and people are yeah, struggling to find their place in the world because like I mean that I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung, and so he talked about the religious function in the psyche is something that doesn't go away even if we choose to no longer participate
right.
in a religion per se, that religious function of the psyche still exists.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to, for people who aren't familiar with your work and your journey, I just thought it might be fun for you to take us a little bit into the story of where you were. You used to be a mega church pastor through your own journey of what's called deconstruction and kind of pulling apart where you had been and where you are now.
Yeah. Well, what happened is You know that phrase, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the Cliff Notes version would be that I grew up loosely Catholic. My mother was an alcoholic. My father left when I was very young. My family life growing up was very traumatic,
Mm,
abusive, chaotic,
yeah.
and I kind of muddled through high school. And my senior year in high school, actually, the summer after I graduated, I had breakfast with a friend at McDonald's in Blacksburg, Virginia, Chuck Young. His father was on staff with
Huh.
the Navigators. And in that conversation, he kind of knew that I was struggling through life. And I prayed the sinner's prayer over, my coffee and egg McMuffin and McDonald's. And so that kind of was my entry into a sort of evangelical, born again sort of Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I went off to college. I did my undergrad at East Tennessee State University. And like the first week I was there, I bumped into the campus director for Campus Crusade for Christ, which
Mm-hmm.
you may or may not know a lot about, but
A little bit.
uh,
Yeah.
it's kind of a campus parachurch ministry. And
Yeah.
he invited me to come out to one of the meetings, and so I did that. I didn't know anybody at school, and here I was, a new Christian. And so yeah, so I went, and it got to a point where he asked me if I'd be willing to share my story, like how I came to become a Christian, the whole
Uh-huh.
kind of Christian testimony. And so I did that. I stood up in one of our student meetings, and it was kind of like something came over me, and I gave this impassioned speech about my conversion to Christianity. And
Wow.
so that's was kind of all it took for me to discover, like, okay, well, this is something that I can kind of do,
Right.
speak to
Right.
people. um, and that kind of led to my becoming involved in the leadership of the student campus ministry. I was like the student president for a couple of years, and
Uh-huh.
um, I kind of found my path. My identity was to be a Christian leader, and that really gave me a sense of meaning. And that followed me all the way to Chicago, where I did my MDiv at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. So I got my div there, and Trinity was a great experience. It's a little more diverse, which I liked. I mean, I kind of was
Hmm.
like Dallas, Trinity. I mean, there was a few that I was considering.
Yeah.
And I went to Trinity and kind of excelled in their homiletics department and so on. And that's when, let's see, Scott McKnight taught, I took New Testament from him. And Wayne Grudem was there, and
Uh-huh.
some of that ilk of uh, you know, leaders and scholars. While I was
Yeah.
so I someone told me, Jim, you should consider that there's a there's a ministry nearby, and they're looking to add pastoral staff. And
Uh-huh.
I think you'd be a great candidate in terms of the kind of person that they're looking for. So off I went looking for this church, which I, couldn't find it. I drove all over the place looking for this address. I couldn't find it. And I couldn't find it because I didn't realize that it was basically a university. I mean, it was a mega church. I'd never seen a church that large. I was looking for, like,
Wow.
a regular
Like,
church. This was more like
yeah.
an industrial park. So
Wow.
I,
And this is
was
in the Chicago area also?
right, Chicago suburbs, Willow Creek
Yeah.
Community Church.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah. Been there once.
yeah,
Yeah.
so, that at the time was the largest church in North America. Since then a lot's happened, and I around in with Willow Creek and other churches and things like this. But so I accepted a position, and worked there on the pastoral staff. And at least at the time, part of the idea was, well, what if we tried to take this model around the country? And so I decided to go into the Southeast. I was familiar with that. I kind of
Right.
was born in Bristol, Tennessee. I went to, East Tennessee State University, and
Yeah.
I've lived many, many years of my life in Nashville. So I planted and pastored a church there also that grew and grew and was kind of in that model, the seeker targeted model of Willow
Right.
Creek.
Right.
And, and that kind of gets you into the whole, church growth, conference speaking,
Yeah.
how sometimes church culture is celebrity culture, right? Like everyone's walking around talking about how big is your church, and,
Yeah.
we give preference to certain, leaders that
Sure.
are succeeding by some kind of numerical standard. But I
Yep.
started realizing, though, that I started noticing that a lot of the issues among the people that I knew in our ministry like persisted: depression, anxiety, broken relationships, a lot of brokenness and woundedness.
Mm.
And for some reason, my kind of bulletproof evangelical theology didn't seem to be moving the needle in terms of real life transformation for people.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I had like a rare moment of honesty in those days where I looked in the mirror and said, it's not really working for me either. I'm stressed out. I'm broken and wounded. I'm kind
Uh-huh.
of trying. And so there was that cognitive dissonance kind of crescendoed when I had coffee with a young woman who was married to one of our worship leaders, and she was being physically abused.
Oh
And
gosh.
so that like escalated this cognitive dissonance. And ultimately, I decided that, something's desperately wrong and I need to figure out what that is. And so essentially, I walked away from my ministerial career. I walked away from the Christianity that I had known for so many years to do like a major like do over. I got to
Yeah.
figure this out.
Wow.
And that was rough. I mean,
Yeah.
my identity, my financial security, my
Sure.
existential belief system, my all of that kind of went up in smoke.
In flames. Yeah, you really laid it all on the line.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I
And did you
started
have a
right.
family at that time?
I do and did I did and do.
Uh-huh.
I have one daughter, 27 years old, Jessica, who is a licensed clinical social worker in Nashville. It's my only child, but um, I love her very much, and we can,
Yeah.
talk about that, a
Yeah.
little bit more also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I started blogging about this journey out of religion, the
Wow.
ministry who left religion, and a strange sort of, I guess, fate is that um, there was an individual who was an editor at a publishing house who started reading my blog and contacted me and said, "Hey, what would you think about writing your story?" At that time, the only kind of deconstruction story there really was, and I don't know if you ever read this, Blue Like Jazz, was a
No.
book. Okay. And Don Miller wrote Blue Like Jazz.
Huh.
And so this publishing house came and like, what would you think about telling your stories? That's how I started writing books. The first of 8 books that I've published came out in 2005, called
Mm-hmm.
Divine Nobodies: Shedding
Uh,
Religion to Find God and the Unlikely People Who Help You. So
wow.
people would read the book, they would contact me, Jim. I really, the reason why the book really worked wasn't that there was anything brilliant about it, just that people could relate to what I was saying from their own
Yeah.
experience. So
Sure.
that led to me starting conversations through emails. It led to, me having conversations like we are right now. Back then it was Skype.
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
um, and that led to me starting to meet people one on one. And I started noticing a lot of patterns. I
Yeah.
estimated that probably I've spent about 40,000 hours over the years meeting with people individually, and you start seeing common threads, and
Yep.
this was back when religious deconstruction wasn't a thing. Religious trauma syndrome wasn't even like on anybody's radar. I worked
Mm-hmm.
with Marlene Wintle, who kind of coined the term, and it was just something that I just kind of slug out a little bit on my own because there wasn't really any resources at the time. Like fast forward to now, there, a lot of people were talking about really, okay,
Very different. Yeah.
yeah. Eventually, I founded the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality in 2019. which is a a community where people can come and explore spirituality kind of beyond the traditional religious frameworks,
Hmm.
without judgment, and the freedom to really do that, to kind of work through religious deconstruction, reconstruction process, and so on.
Yeah.
And then created a training program for non-religious spiritual directors. So, spiritual direction is a thing, right? It's got a
Yeah.
history, right? There's
Yeah.
like Spiritual Directors International, and historically it's been kind of rooted into religious traditions. And so I retooled it for the non-religious space.
Mm.
And so we train non-religious spiritual directors, and in the center, there's like workshops and support groups and discussion circles and things like this. And eventually, this all led to my thinking of, or sort of, um, uh, realizing that there was something called existential health
Mm.
that sometimes you deconstruct, you just go deeper, 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 deeper. At first it's got maybe something to do with theological doctrines, and then you kind of look at the psychological architecture beneath them, and then you go all the way down to the anthropological aspects of our species, for which calling what we did religion might be a little unfortunate, in that the need for ritual, belonging,
Right.
and so on is more embedded in our species, and so
Yes. Yeah.
that's why when people leave religion, when they leave it all behind, they struggle, because they're actually leaving behind, in some cases, an orientation and structure that has nothing to do really with any particular religion, but more about what we do as Homo sapiens. But so existential health has been sort of my thing. There is a three-dimensional model of health: psychological, physical, and social. And I'm trying to get existential health as the four part of that three-dimensional model.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I've been writing a lot about that. I have an academic paper coming out in the Journal for Existential Analysis in July, which kind of talks about this whole area of existential health and how it's different
Yeah.
than let's say, the psychological or mental health area. They're not
Hmm.
unrelated, but I mean they are distinct. So that's kind of been the journey for
Yeah.
me. We The Institute of Existential Health is a new thing that we've just started to develop and build, so that there's kind of a, a body of people that are committed to this field as existential health practitioners, and
Mm.
continuing education and best practices and ethics and responsibilities and things like this. And
That's
so,
exciting.
yeah. And I think that one of my, of course, when I was in Nampa, I lived down the street from Tom Ward.
Huh.
So we
Now,
would have Tom.
did you know each other like when you moved? Who was there first, and did you have any idea that he was there? And
No, he was there first, and I had no idea he was there. And then we figured it out, because we were friends like on social media and other things, but
yeah,
and then so
and you're like, we're neighbors.
right, we started meeting for coffee. And
Oh,
of
cool.
course,
Who knew
my,
Nashville, Idaho was such a hotbed for religious
I
deconstruction?
know, right? And like, I think that open and relational theology, process theology, you know, a lot of people that leave, you know, theistic religion, let's say,
Yeah.
but but want to continue to hold a belief in God, let's say,
Hmm.
that open and relational theology and pantheism, process philosophy is a place that I think a lot of people will find themselves.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and of course, Tom and Tripp did that one book on deconstruction, and so I think that they're starting to recognize that it's sort of like a conversation to have. I feel like that civilizationally, particularly in the West, cultural nihilism and existential health are two very important developments that we should be paying more attention to.
Hmm.
Gen Z, for example, the rate of suicide has doubled the rest of the adult population. And
Wow.
whereas, you know, whereas nihilism appears a lot in the people that I work with, because after they leave religion, their that kind of belief system collapse that sometimes happens, and the absence of maybe tools to reconstruct going forward
Hmm.
leaves them in this spot where they're really, struggling. Sometimes some forms of religion will leave behind human development deficits, the sort of adult sense of critical thinking, skills, delayed emotional development, maybe an inadequate base of human development knowledge, even depending on like
Right.
what kind of religion you were involved in. You may not have been exposed to like other worthy fields of human development and so on. Maybe they learned the theology a little too good, and so they took original sin into the place where they don't trust themselves going forward, and so there's a
Right.
lack of agency and autonomy that has been a bit corrupted through their or compromised through their involvement in religion, and they kind of get stuck.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think that there's a cultural nihilism that's a little different. I think it's you know kind of baked into the reality for most people that are in that Gen Z and younger. This sort of you know a depressive realism, a lack of optimism about the future,
Right.
the destabilization of almost every, whether it's religion or technology or the climate or politics or, the some people call the meta crisis,
Right.
you, you know, um, so this,
Everything is all crumbling at the same time. And
right,
it's
right.
that is like an existential threat. It really is.
Yeah. Well, and I recently wrote a thing on what's called the sixth extinction. So there's five other times in our species that we came close to becoming extinct. And there are some debates about the whole bottleneck theory, which is not really this, but the idea with the sixth extinction is that for the first time in human history, our species has um we have gotten to the point where we've learned how to destabilize enough of the stabilizing structures of our existence that we did no longer make the earth inhabitable for us. It's not like the earth is going to go away,
Right.
but but
But
it
we
would
could.
right, right. And so that's part of that cultural nihilism. It's not only does anything really matter, but does it really matter in any kind of way? Like it's not just a confrontation with human mortality, let's say, but it's an acknowledgement that it's all coming to an end.
Yeah.
And you do find that in other, like Buddhist cosmology tends to hold the belief that there's like an infinite number of the universes come and then they dissolve and there's
Right.
others. But not
The whole idea of
usually,
cycles of time is very much in Hinduism also.
yeah. But in the West, not so much. I mean, like, we're kind of attached to the idea of invincibility, and, we
Yeah.
kind of forget about all the, the Incan Empire, the Aztec, and the Roman Empire, like, but we're
Right.
convinced but that's starting to thin, right?
Hmm.
Like the American political scene has sort of like begun to cast even deeper doubt about, like, what the future holds.
Right. Right. In many big ways. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was talking to a Gen Zer she was essentially saying that, like, all she knows is Trump almost. Like,
Huh.
that's all she knows. Like,
Wow.
we take for granted at our age that we knew what life was like before, like, the social media and addiction to, phones, or before when there were other presidents and other times,
Right.
like, and she was like, I barely know Obama. Like, I
Right.
barely know that.
Right.
Like the characteristics at the times have been, COVID and Trump for a
Right.
lot of people. Like, that's
Right.
been the
Yeah.
main, you know,
Yeah.
and AI.
Mm-hmm. Which is threatening everybody's future. I mean,
Yeah,
it's interesting to see these. I've seen examples of at least three commencement speakers mentioning AI at universities and getting booed,
I saw
and
that
they're
too.
like clueless about it. They're like, "What? What's the matter? What?" and and the kids are like, because they know that their future is threatened.
Right. Well, not that, yeah, and I saw those too. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
They were like, there's some kind of disconnect, right? Like they're not
yeah,
getting it. You
you're
know,
not getting it.
the other thing that I've seen too is that a lot of people, let's say, might leave religion, but that doesn't mean that they don't switch their loyalties to another thing. You know, they just
Right,
they find another guru, another influence, another system or
right.
something that, you know, because they've not done the deeper developmental work.
Yeah.
Well, AI is a perfect guide. Perfect.
Mm,
Like it's the perfect, like tell me one thing that AI can't do for you or help you. You know,
right.
and so it's an easy switch in terms of, you know, it becoming, you know, your new, whereas God might have been the external authority, and let's say your beliefs change, you know, AI fits that perfectly.
Hmm. If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd invite you to download my free guide, Awakening to the Sacred: 5 Keys to Experiencing the Divine. I hope to, in this guide, help you to unlock a more joyful, creative, and spirit-filled life, especially if you're hungry for a spiritual life that feels real. So check out the show notes and click on the link below to access that free guide. Thanks.
You know, like I even had a guy tell me, like, why would I could go to a therapist and probably waste 20 minutes in that conversation about something that like doesn't even relate. And I can go to AI and I can
Uh-huh.
plug in a few questions and get more helpful information about my thing than if I went to therapy, you know. Now, of course, we know that therapy is not informational, but I'm just saying that that's the
Right.
way a lot of people
Yeah.
are thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're not always, and and I've had some amazing conversations with AI that have been shocking in how what a very powerful analysis it gave me.
Yeah,
And it also presented it to me in a way that really was very emotionally um satisfying isn't the word. It I felt seen, right? Which is
yeah.
crazy.
No, I get it. Like,
And at the
it,
same time, you have to have kind of like not everybody can then say to themselves, but this is a machine and it's kind of sycophantic and it's not necessarily going to tell me what I need to hear. That's the hard stuff that a
right,
therapist might. And so
right.
that's a danger, in
Yeah.
terms of those kinds of uses.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty good. You know, like the idea that AI can't replicate human characteristics. Yes, that's true, literally, but it's not true experientially because, like,
Right.
it can offer positive regard. It can
Right.
make you feel understood. It can even make you
Yes.
that there's a continuity to the connections that kind of feel like something like a relationship.
Yeah.
And you know, like if in your life, let's say you're in a, I don't know, a marriage or friendships or highly critical and you don't get listened to, and it's always the, you know, like AI isn't you
Right.
know, and you pair that up with this other thing going on where like, you know, these robotic figures
Yeah.
that, you know, the, or programmed to be live-in partners or whatever.
Right.
When I
Right.
recently, they had the first marriage. I don't know. It's like,
No.
I think it
Oh
was
my gosh.
I think it was in China or Japan. I can't remember
Oh, I missed
where
that.
it was the first marriage between a human and a like an AI doll, not doll, but you know, like a
Yeah.
robot thing, you know. Um, and so it's but it's doom scrolling, you know, like
Right.
the a lot of Gen Z, you know, we we don't have the capacity to hold the suffering of the world as singular
Right.
individuals, people, you know,
Right.
and we will do unhealthy things, withdrawal, remove ourselves from life. All kinds of things can happen because we don't. And so I think that we need to develop more capacities to engage life as it is. And that's one of the ways I
Right.
talk a lot about, existential health and nihilism is it's a like for example, the capacity to live life without any guarantees,
Mm,
or without certainty.
right.
Um, at least certainty in some ways.
Yeah, I was
Like,
going to ask you if you had in your model of if you have a model of existential health, are there kind of like three or four kind of core ideas or core pillars that what when we have existential health, we have these capacities, or and that's one, the ability to
yeah,
live without certainty and guarantee.
yeah. Well, I think that at the core, existential health is the kind of relationship you have with being a human person and the lived human experience living in the universe.
Yeah.
And we sometimes don't think about it at that level because it's almost like, a fish not thinking about the water. Like we're kind of swimming around in this thing called life and being human beings, but we've not really thought about it at that level. I think that there's a few things that one could say are characteristic of the human situation.
Hmm.
Um, One is human mortality, right? Like
Yep.
we know that there's a 100% death rate. We will all die. Okay.
Right.
And another one is human groundlessness, meaning that, and not everybody would agree with this, but the idea here is that the universe did not pop into place with a prescribed universal meaning, like
Mm.
an absolute universal meaning that we can orient our lives toward. And that this is one of the conditions of the human reality. It's not that there is no meaning, but it's a meaning that you're going to have to create because the universe like didn't it wasn't preloaded with one. Like that's why we all disagree on what it actually is. Like what is the meaning? Like you could get 100 different answers to that question. But another one would be um, human insatiability, meaning that no matter what we do, no matter how much enlightenment, how much therapy, how much self help, how much success, there is always a sense of lack, a sense of not quite reaching a place of completion. We're always
Mm.
incomplete in some way. And
Right.
that is a fact just built into the reality of being a human being. So if you think that the next self-help book or the next meditation session or your next new and improved belief about something is going to finally,
Yeah.
then it won't because that's built into the human condition.
Wow.
The other one
Yeah.
is
That's a
human
hard
isolation.
truth.
Yeah, yeah. Human
Guilty as
isolation.
charged.
Right. Me too. Um, Human isolation is another. No matter how
Mm.
much we get, even if we 100% can buy into and experience like non-dualism, the interdependence of all things, the oneness of life, and so on, the fact of the matter is that this is an embodied experience as Homo sapiens. You were born into this world in a body, you carry yourself through life in a body, and you'll die in one, and nobody can share that with you. No, you
Right.
weren't born was someone else in you, or you're not taking somebody with you as you live, and so on.
Right.
And that basic aspect of the human condition or the human situation is quite significant. Um, and of course, you could add human suffering, although, so part of what happens often, let's say, is that religion has an answer to all those things, which is one of the reasons why religion is so compelling.
Right.
Like there is a God, and on the basis of that God, there is universal meaning. The universe has meaning.
Right.
Human mortality is not really a problem because after you die, there's an afterlife. So it's just kind of a bump in the road to your eternal future. Um, your sense of self and identity is sort of anchored in
Mm-hmm.
your, connection to God. The idea of isolation or fragmentation can be overcome through through relationship with God, through the relationship with community, and even this insatiability can be resolved, right? Like if you have a proper relationship with God, then you will be happy and whole and you know
Right.
and complete, right? Like it's the God-shaped whole, right? If we can get that bit right,
Yeah.
then we'll be complete. And
Yeah.
so I think what happens is people leave religion and it's almost like you go to a Broadway play, let's say, and the play is called Life. So everybody
Uh-huh.
sits down, you know, and everything dims and the spotlight's on and the curtains like fly open and everyone's looking at life on the stage and they're like, oh my God, this is this is terrifying.
Right.
Like it's in the absence of the religious structure, it creates exposure, and that
Yeah.
exposure can be terrifying. That's why many of the existential philosophers, like Sartre, said that that basically man. Well, one thing he said is man is cursed to be free because he understood that freedom, for example, in the absence of a God that is kind of like laying out the blueprint
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly you're responsible for your life, your values, your choices, your meaning, all that, then it feels quite a heavy weight to carry, right? Like I still don't know how to work some things on this remote control of the TV, and I'm supposed to like determine the meaning of life for myself, like,
Right. Right.
you know,
Right. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or bear the weight of being a free individual in the universe. And that's why I think it's like developing capacities. Like we don't have the capacity to inhabit life as it truly is.
Right. Right.
And
Which is messed up
sometimes,
in a lot of ways. Really, it's
yeah,
like this is a it's an insanity project down here in this life.
right. So
It's too damn hard.
yeah. Well, and that's why like nihilism, the word nihilism, it just means the absence of meaning or without meaning. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's a neutral term. It's
Yeah.
it's no different from saying like my iPhone is black. It's making a statement neutrally that
Mm-hmm.
the universe does not come with meaning.
Mm.
Um, and so now psychological nihilism is different because it's the distress of discovering that, for example, if you didn't know that,
Right.
like if you
Right.
left a structure, a belief system structure that had you thinking that everything's figured out, like the story, and we know how we are sometimes. It's like anything that's not lining up, we can always pull the God works in mysterious ways, or
Right.
his ways are higher than our ways. Like there's kind of an
Sure.
out always to establish the idea that there is order, there are guarantees, there is justice, there is certainty there. And so the psychological nihilism then is that distress,
Yeah.
that a person can feel, when that gets kind of shaken up. But there are also many gifts that nihilism offers. Like, many people have pointed out that confronting and acknowledging the truth of our mortality, let's say, becomes a an energy to embrace life more fully, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
you know um, and the realization of human insatiability could ease up a person, could be a source of self-compassion and self-love and self-kindness, that you don't have, the measurement isn't you being perfect,
Right.
completely whole, completely healed, completely enlightened. That it's okay that none of us are finished or
Yeah.
completed in
Yeah.
that regard. You
Yeah.
know, um,
I want to two things I want to mention, throw in here. One is there was a part in Richard Rohr's book, The Universal Christ, that I really loved so much, where he's talking about in the New Testament, where Paul is talking about in Christ, being in Christ, en Christo, and the body
yeah,
of Christ.
yeah,
And Rohr says that the individual person cannot bear either the weight of glory or the burden of sin alone. And
yeah,
that it's only as a body of Christ, as a greater whole, as it say, we might say, divine matrix, interconnected web of life, that we can bear those things. It's too
right,
much for one person to bear. And I
yeah,
really appreciated that,
yeah,
even if you remove, the Christological and doctrinal language in that, and just recognize it's just like exactly what you've been saying, that
yeah,
we can't bear all that on our own. But
yes,
in the New Testament, it offers this idea of the body of Christ, but which we can also again talk about as the interconnected web of life, the divine matrix, the sacred
right,
whole.
yeah. That you know, um, I think that sometimes it'd be easy to think that life is kind of going on and I'm over here and forget that we are life. We are life. We're never
Right.
separate from life because it's us. Like
It's us. Right.
this is life and I'm in it and I'm part of it.
Right. We are
Um,
nature. We are life.
right. But I think that Darwin's survival of the fittest idea, I think, was greatly overstated, and because it seems to me what he really identified was that the chief characteristic that allowed our species to survive and flourish was our ability to collaborate, to
Mm-hmm.
work together, and that inevitably was that, like, we knew instinctually from the beginning that we can't carry this alone.
Right.
Like that, um, and
And I've heard some
we
people say that when he talked about survival of the fittest, it wasn't so much survival of the strongest competitor, but of the one most able to fit into their
that
environment.
right. And the interesting thing also about that is that you know a person could say that the one really interesting thing about life, because one of the problems with nihilism, and even like it can just point out what seems to be like the kind of negative side of the story, although it's neutral, but it sounds a little maybe not inspiring like right off the top. But part of it is that it's missing the way that life is also regenerative, inherently, and we should take that into account. That it's not like life is just a big bad monster to fight. It's actually
Yeah.
like inherently very regenerative in all kinds of ways. In fact, some people have pointed out that life at its most microscopic level appears to have what some people call a learning algorithm.
Mm,
Although that those words might could be they could imply more to some people than they should, depending on what kind of like evolutionary biology. But the point is that there seems to be at every level this capacity to function in its environment in a way where it adapts,
yeah. Yeah.
that it can metabolize its environment, the complexity of it adapt. Um, and I mean, there's a failure rate because I think 99.9% of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct. But you could say though, I mean, we're on a pretty good run. Homo sapiens, if you take modern humans to be like 300,000 years old or something, that like we've
Hmm.
um so I think that one of the fascinating things about you saying about Christ consciousness and Richard War is, there's this niche like Christian atheism. I don't know how much you know,
A little bit, just a little bit.
well,
Not a lot.
Zizek, who's a philosopher, and other people,
Yeah,
but here's the fascinating thing about it. Like, so that version of the gospel is that, of course, it's mythological in nature, but the storyline is that God decides to confine himself in Jesus, literally, like 100% chooses to like takes the radical incarnation. God literally becomes the human person, Jesus of Nazareth.
right.
So Jesus dies, which disappears God as the big other from everything. That this is this significance of Jesus' death is that when Jesus dies, God in that sense dies. And then the resurrection then is the relocating of sort of the divine authority and power out of any kind of a hierarchy into the community of human beings. It like the egalitarian community, which is then sort of embodied in the Book of Acts, this first
Mm,
early story of the early church. That this was sort of like symbolically showing the transfer of authority and power from a divine hierarchy with some God at the top somewhere out there, and
right.
it being like embodied in the people, you know, themselves,
Like distributed throughout versus,
yes,
yeah,
which there is that kind of idea
thing.
already a little bit through the Holy Spirit,
Right, right.
but it's only, but the twist would be that for them, Christian atheists, is that God disappears himself as the big other and only exists now. If there's anything that could ever even be said about God per se, it would only be what could be said about what's happening in and among us as human persons. So
Yeah.
it's kind of in,
Well, and in a sense, there's a little bit of resonance with Teilhard in terms of talking about like sort of God incarnating into all of matter.
yeah,
That's the incarnation is really that radical that it's diving into the very heart of matter. So
yeah,
not just even human beings, but then and then evolving up through everything, and
yeah,
and being revealed in Jesus, but that
yeah,
really God is incarnated into the whole material world.
yeah. It is interesting that one thing that I find is that people that often leave religion, let's say the Christian religion, their interest in Jesus as a person persists pretty strongly.
Yeah,
And almost I could just predict anything I ever write about like a post-religion Jesus or is always the most engaged thing that I ever write, and so I think that um it's really fascinating how Jesus as a figure persists in the imagination and hearts of so many people, even those that have left religion. And one of
yeah,
my not observations, which I think is that sometimes I feel a little bit like Jesus gets slightly left behind in some more of the philosophical ways of thinking about God, like pantheism, panentheism, even that it's
right.
it's sort of a philosophical and sometimes a little bit abstract
Hmm.
idea, and I know that, and it sometimes is missing the embodiment of it. Like
Yeah,
I think there's something about Jesus as a person, as an embodiment of truth, and so on. Um, like um, the philosopher's kind of religion sometimes is sort of up in this sort of abstract metaphysical realm,
right, right, right,
that
right.
we kind of want to play around with it. And that the liberation theology and other forms of that really put a big focus on the person of
Feminist
Jesus.
theology, womanist theology. Yeah, they
Yeah,
all do that more embodied.
yeah. So that's I think I always seem to be aware that is true. But I think a lot of people they can lose faith in a lot. Like I know people who leave religion and then they get involved in more, for lack of a better word, like new age spirituality, which is like what is that even? But I'm just, for the sake of this conversation, then they're re-traumatized by finding the same thing, like it's
Right.
legalistic. Here's what you need to do. If it's not working, you're not doing it right. And
Right.
we're right back on the,
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, a major, yeah, and the wheel of suffering to borrow from Eastern traditions.
Yeah.
Well, let's pause part one here, and then
Okay.
when we get into part two, the second half of this conversation, I would love to dive a little bit more into meaning in the world because I want to push back a little bit on some of the way you talked about meaning
Okay.
and trans-religious spirituality, which we're both very interested in. And then
Yeah.
I'd like to, if we have time, talk a little bit about a blog that you wrote recently called 10 Religious Ideas We No Longer Need to Believe.
Okay.
And I thought that was some really great material. So we'll just pause here and then continue this in part two. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.